Hey everyone, welcome back to Deciding to Love. I'm scooting back here for those of you that are watching this episode so you can see my Decide t-shirt. I'm going to be offering merch in the near future, and stay tuned for those details. But this is episode number 2. And if you missed episode number 1, make sure that you go back and take a listen or watch that episode on really any platform. If you want the visual component, make sure you go to Spotify or YouTube, and I'll kind of reiterate that here in just a little bit. But in episode number 1, I had the opportunity to share some clips from an interview that I did with my grandfather a number of years ago about his relationship with my grandmother. They were married for 66 years, and there's a lot of education and inspiration to be taken from their relationship. I'm going to do a full-length episode on their relationship in the future, but make sure you take a listen to that episode number 1, and I think that you'll find some inspiration and encouragement if you're just willing to sit and really soak it in. Check out episode number 1 if you missed that. Now, as we get into today's episode, or before we get into the main part of today's episode, I wanted to share a few housekeeping notes for you, or with you, that are important not only for the now, for the present, but also for the future of the show. The show is called Deciding to Love, and innate to that idea, in fact, in case you missed the trailer, I explained how the Latin root of the word decide literally means to cut off, as in cut off all alternatives. If you want to create an amazing long-term romantic relationship that you enjoy, that you want to be in, that you feel great in, you've got to be all in. You've got to truly decide to love. However, despite that recommendation toward the kind of blinders on commitment that you're going to hear consistently on this show, there's a big caveat to that. If you're in a relationship where you're experiencing a partner who is cheating on you, is abusing you, or is demonstrating severe neglect, that is a different conversation. And I just want to be clear about that distinction. I'm not suggesting you ignore those things. And my encouragement to you, at the very least, would be to see the appropriate professional or professionals if that is the unfortunate situation. Now, I am going to consistently reference putting in the work even when you don't feel like it. Because I think at the root of a lot of the issues that we see in our culture in the context of long-term romantic relationships is a complacency. I don't feel like fill in the blank. I don't feel like loving this person. I don't feel like putting the work in, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to consistently challenge you to move beyond those feelings. Look, 5-year-olds or 3-year-olds don't feel like something and they throw tantrums. We can be better than that. We can choose to move beyond however we may feel in that particular moment and do the work necessary to create that amazing long-term romantic relationship, trusting that on the other side of that are the great feelings. And I guarantee it, in fact. However, the last thing that I want you to assume is that I'm suggesting you become a robot. This isn't do without feeling forever and ever. And in fact, I'm one of the most passionate, emotional individuals you may come in contact with. I am an absolute sap, a romantic heart. I'm crying at rom-coms and podcasts and emotional, sentimental, orchestral soundtrack music. I'm extremely emotional. The last thing I personally want to be is a robot. And the last thing I'm certainly suggesting is that you do the same thing. There's certainly a balance to be had there. But do know, in the context of me continuing to challenge you to do the work, that we can all look forward to the benefit on the other side of that work, even if in the moment we don't feel like it, of those wonderful feelings that I think we're all here to try to feel, especially if we're not currently feeling them in that relationship. Number 3, I'm certainly not here posing as an authority. I could maybe have started these notes with that particular point. Look, I'm 46 years old. I'm single. I obviously don't have this all figured out. And so with you collectively, as I said at the outset of the show, I think maybe on the trailer, I want to learn. We can learn this together through hearing from other couples who have figured out how to create wonderful relationships, and certainly discussing or talking with, listening to professionals, therapists, or otherwise, who can help us develop amazing long-term romantic relationships. I'm not here to lead that conversation as much as to be a host. I have extensive experience as a podcast host. I have extensive experience building companies or brands. I'm going to do that work certainly here and behind the scenes, but I'm not trying to pose as an authority, and I just want to go ahead and put that out there up front for friends, family, and the like. Number 4, and this is kind of a caveat to that point, just because I will be the first to admit that I'm not an authority on the topic doesn't mean that I don't have some pretty strong opinions and perspectives. Look, I've had certain shortcomings, or certainly have had shortcomings, I should say, in the context of relationships, romantic relationships over the years. But I've learned through those. But unfortunately, I've had some pretty negative experiences opposite others as well. And I've also learned from those. I've also had the, in some cases, unfortunate opportunity to observe some pretty concerning things in other people's romantic relationships and in our culture. And I think there's some issues that need to be addressed head on that aren't, it seems, readily discussed or consistently discussed and highlighted in our culture when it comes to romantic relationships. So I'm not going to be shy to have some strong opinions and perspectives. And that is the caveat to me not being an authority. Now, I am going to be, as just because it makes sense in context, of course, of the show, and trying to share from personal experience as much as possible, I'm certainly going to be alluding to past relationships, romantic relationships in particular, potentially even present relationships, if that is the context. But I'm certainly never going to call out an individual. That's not what the show is for. And so I'll just go ahead and put that out there. And if for some reason you're trying to play a guessing game behind the scenes about who I might be referencing, just stop already. You've missed the point of the show. We've observed culture, particularly in the last few years, be very quick to judge. And look, there may have been reasons to call out certain people's behavior at times, but at the end of the day, a lot of the behavior around cancel culture is quite hypocritical. And ironically, and at least in some cases, maybe coming from people who aren't owning the responsibility for their own behavior as well as they should be. Part of this show is going to be me learning as we go. We're going to learn this stuff together, right? And I may assert something, I may have an idea or a perspective now or in a week or in a year, whenever it may be, that later on I may realize wasn't a great perspective to have, or it could be improved in some way. And I hope that, in fact, I'll expect that you all are better than mainstream culture or pop culture, and that you'll make room for that type of growth. That is being human. I hope that we are all evolving in some way. Certainly that we can take ownership for where we may have fallen short, but then we make the changes necessary in our perspective or our behavior, and we move forward. And so again, I will not only hope, but expect that you'll make room for those potential changes in the future. I will say this show is not always appropriate to play around kids. A lot of the times it'll be fine, but we're definitely going to get into some honest and frank conversation about sex on this show. So I just want to go ahead and give you all a heads up, put that out there just in case. And then lastly, as a creative challenge to myself, my intention with this show is not to just be an audio podcast, or not to just kind of fall into the masses of talking head video podcasts even that are out there. I want this to be a multimedia experience. So in that regard, I know that a lot of you are used to listening to podcasts, and that's totally fine. I will always, at least 99% of the time, design this show so that you can simply listen to the audio version of it. But just keep in mind that in most cases, there is going to be some type of visual component to that, whether that's photos, video, or a combination of both. And by the way, that includes today's episode that we're about to get into here in just a second. So just keep that in mind. And on that note, my encouragement to you is to go to Spotify or to YouTube, both of which enable you to either just listen to the show if you want to, or see the visuals if you want to. And Spotify, I think, honestly, is the most flexible platform in that regard, but either certainly will work. And by the way, please don't be shy. Comment your thoughts on the particular episode. Would love to get engagement, hear from you all. And if you've got questions for me, or for the show, or for upcoming guests, professionals, therapists in particular, that you'd like me to ask, or topics you'd like me to get into, please don't hesitate to comment with all of that as well. All right, enough housekeeping for now. Look, this show is rooted in part, anyway, in taking a deep dive into our psychology, the psychology behind our individual behavior, and then certainly the psychology of the relationship that we may be in. There is no creating an amazing long-term romantic relationship unless we do both. And look, it can be difficult, it can be hard, but it's absolutely necessary. We have to put the work in to take personal responsibility for our thoughts, the resulting emotions and behaviors as well. I might liken this actually to fitness. In fact, I'm going to be offering some personal training services in the near future for those of you that are interested in not only taking a personal step toward individual health and fitness in a positive way, but doing so also for the sake of your partner, for the visual enjoyment, if you will. And so I'll be announcing more details about that in the future. But I think we can make a really interesting comparison between the work necessary to remain fit for the long term as we age to long-term romantic relationships. Just as an example, when you were 20, maybe you could get out and eat anything, drink like crazy, get 3 hours of sleep, and then wake up the next day with a six-pack. Very similarly, though, when you're 40, 50, 60, and potentially even beyond, you may be able to still wake up with that six-pack. But the big caveat here is that it takes honesty with yourself. It takes more intention and certainly a bit of discipline and work. Very similarly, when you're in the honeymoon period of your relationship, you naturally wanted to be around your partner all the time. Conversation was really fun and exciting and interesting. You wanted to have sex all the time, and it was so amazing. Nobody could do anything wrong. And then guess what? That's, or at least a version of all of that, is still possible as you move into your 40s, 50s, 60s, as you're in a relationship for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and beyond. But very similar to fitness, it just takes a bit of honesty with yourself, a willingness to take ownership, personal responsibility. And certainly in the context of a relationship, your partner needs to be on board as well, and intentionally work at that relationship. And you can have a great version of what you may have had in the so-called honeymoon period or the outset of the relationship where things felt or seemed easier. So on that note, I thought that since we're regularly with our guests and certainly in conversation with therapists that are going to be coming on the show as well, going to be delving into the psychology of individuals and couples, I would lead the way with a bit of psychological and just general background of myself. And maybe that'll give you further context into why I am hosting Deciding to Love, this new relationship podcast.
We're upstairs in our living room, and we're sitting around the Christmas tree, and yeah, lots of decorations on our Christmas tree, and we got all presents under there, and we got some in the box too. And
what are you hoping to get for Christmas, Nathan?
Gum.
Okay. Jason, what do you want for Christmas?
I had the amazing opportunity to grow up in Japan. Spent about 10 years of my childhood there, actually. We moved to Japan when I was about 2 years old. And at that time, and for some time, international phone calls were actually quite expensive. And so rather than calling family back in the US, we would record audio cassettes, performances or conversations, and send those back to family as a way to connect with them. Super fun. My parents were in ministry, so we spent lots of time around people. Community and friendships were everything. Certainly there was a strong spiritual component to all of this, but much of what my parents did was hosting people at our home, teaching English, hosting cooking classes, running camps. Service, adding value, and ultimately connection with others was at the heart of my parents' ministry. After we moved back to the US in my teenage years, we settled in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is where I'm still at. My dad was a department chair at a local university, and through that, he and my mom hosted students from the university department in our home on a relatively regular basis. Again, community, connection, service. My brothers and I were in the middle of it all. I was fortunate to get involved professionally in the photo industry in the next few years, and over time, the thing I loved most was the community itself. If I could find ways to connect with and help other photographers, I felt most fulfilled. At the outset, as a professional photographer, helping others may have been simple as sharing camera settings or photography technique, or offering suggestions for improving workflow or client experience. My business partner and wife at the time, Amber, was an extremely talented photographer, and we began getting opportunities to share with photographers at larger scale, or at a larger scale, at conferences, which was amazing. While I was still a full-time photographer, I started an editing company that processed photos for professional photographers. Although the company certainly had financial success, My team and I had the opportunity to work with thousands of photographers and process countless millions of photos over the span of 16 years. And the impact the company had on the lives of these photographers and certainly their businesses was extremely fulfilling. I also started and hosted a photography podcast during that time, creating over 600 episodes of content that enabled me to intentionally connect with and add value to the photo industry during a 7+ year period. The last project I was involved with in the photo industry was a startup focused on making professional photography more accessible to the masses. While it felt more like a corporate experience than maybe my previous experiences, I loved the idea that my team and I were working on something that would be a value add to those with more limited incomes, something I was quite familiar with from my earlier life. You can see the theme here. I feel my best when I have the opportunity to add value to others, to make their lives better, to maybe bring a smile to their faces. So it only makes sense at this stage of my life that I find another opportunity to do just that in this show. But you might say, Nate, why romantic relationships? How do you get from 20+ years in the photography industry to running a relationship podcast? What gives? Totally understand. Let me share at least a few of the reasons. First of all, at this stage of my life, outside of relationships with my family, relationships with my close friends, taking care of my health, and then certainly adding value to the lives of other people like I discussed, there's really nothing more important to me than an intimate relationship with my significant other. But that brings me to the second point, which is that at 46, I'm single. I've obviously fallen short in the romantic relationships department, and I have some things to learn. But rather than cower or get mad, I've taken a more productive and more proactive approach with this show. In addition, because of certain experiences in both my childhood and all the way up into more recent years of my adult life, where it was said or demonstrated over and over again that I wasn't good enough, I've developed an anxious attachment style. And this is something we'll get into in greater depth in future episodes of the show, as it's a struggle for a lot of people. This attachment style has massive drawbacks to life and romantic relationships, but on the positive side, it can also lead to a high level of self-awareness, as well as a high level of sensitivity and empathy for other people's emotions, their needs, their desires. And I know I can leverage these sensitivities and what I'm learning from them to help others better their romantic relationships. So that's that. I hope this all gives a bit of context to why in the world I'm doing this show. And I'll finish with this. This show, as I described at the beginning, is about deciding to love, despite not always feeling like it. Look, this year has been, or the last year I should say, has been a brutal one for me. A lot of loss, resulting heartache, more tears than probably ever in my life, and a lot of questions about self-worth. But deciding to do this show, despite the struggles, despite the sadness, is what has brought us here. And I hope you can take a bit of encouragement and inspiration from that moving forward. All right. Well, that's all for today. Thank you all for listening in to this second episode of Deciding to Love.